I've been out on the edge of the desert. Wow, not very verdant and green, even though it had been raining on and off for weeks in this desert region. Why were we there? Well, I was doing some digging. Why would you dig a hole in a sandy, dry riverbed? Well, a bit of background first, which will lead us eventually to the Aboriginals. Yes, good exercise keeps me fit and able in my medium to old age. Here's where we were aiming to get. You see, we were in the middle of the river. We dug holes backwards and forwards across, and every time we got results like this. Oh, can you see the layers? Okay, now we invented the strata machine. We've shown programs on the fact that the bottom layers don't get there first. The layers are laid down from upstream to downstream in the machine. And does this match reality? Well, that's what you get in the middle of a dry riverbed. Of course, we could dig the sand so easily because it had been raining on and off. The sand was actually damp, but no water was visible. Now, can you see the layers there? Some of them are sort of filamented, others are nice and flat, but they're basically layer after layer. And the ordinary person says the bottom layer got there first. But as you know, we have been experimenting with our strata machines, models 1 all the way through to 12 now. And we've mentioned a name of a man, Johannes Volter. Now, if you want to find out more about him, there's the reference that was originally given to me by the university librarian. And he came across a principle as he was working in the Venice area, that the sand, the mud, does not get their bottom layer up to the top. Now, the importance of that, average creationists even deals with the Grand Canyon as if the bottom layer got there first. Now, Volter's work would say it came from upstream to downstream. Okay, he didn't invent the strata machine. I didn't invent the strata machine, but we've sure improved it. There's our 2018 Mark VI strata machine. There's young Joe. We've actually showed you this many times. And there's the kids who love to spot what's actually happening because they love the water. I mean, kids play in the water. They love to get muddy. There's the water coming from upstream to downstream. And within a fraction of a minute, you notice the layers. Black, white, black, white, black. We have two sorts of sand in here, a heavy one and a light one, and the heavy one is black. But the heavy one always ends up on top. And the time to form these layers, maximum, was 2 minutes. And beyond a shadow of a doubt, because all the people who were there, Diane and Joe included, noticed that in our strata machine, the layers form sideways. But as I mentioned once in a program totally on strata, I cottoned onto this because my professor of geology, the head of the department, came in one day and he said, students, I've got some bad news. The layers in the Grand Canyon form sideways. Never again in all the years I was there did he comment on it. Well, now I've got the time to take colleagues. I mean, here's Daniel. He's into the geological mining area. And here's another hole we dug. Can you see the dark layers? Yes, there are mineral sands in this creek, the darker ones, the heavier ones, and there's the lighter sands. Now, as we walked through this creek, it was very evident that even though the top of the sand looked like a sand dump, in the sand, it was all in layers, and the layers were moving from upstream to downstream. Oh, but is that just a guess? We were there just one day. Daniel had been there riding his mud bike ages ago and come across the same thing. So how do you know how these layers got there? Answer, you get the local land agent, the government employee whose job is to control erosion on the edge of the desert. And here's what he said. He said, this stream is either flooding or it's dry. He said the maximum time in his experience this stream has had water in it is 2 days. And the water would move from upstream to downstream. It would gather up a load of sand. And by the second day when the water disappeared, it would all be dumped because he'd never dug holes in it like we did, but the stream went from upstream to downstream. And he said, why don't you check the train driver? Because while we were there, the train driver came. And we actually got to meet this train driver, and he's been driving this train track all his life. Or what we're verifying, the fact that the stream never had water in it for more than 2 days. And he said, yes, massive flows come down, and they last mostly a day and a half to 2 days, then it's bone dry, which means one thing: those layers form sideways. They came down with the flood waters. They didn't come down in a normal stream. There was no normal stream. There was just massive flooding, or there was no water at all. Now, I want you to compare, because many of the creationists particularly, and the non-creationists, say, oh, rubbish, Steno is right, the bottom layer gets there first. Well, actually it doesn't. The layers come down sideways, just like in our strata machine. There's one of our early strata machines. See the nice layers there? Can you actually see some of them are sort of filamented? But if you cut it open, there's what you get. And you may remember the analogy we made, the one my professor did. Sorry, students, the layers in the Grand Canyon form sideways. Now, this is absolutely unacceptable to most people who still have the idea of shaking a beaker up with water and mud in it is how layers form. No, they don't. The stream doesn't shake up and down. The stream goes sideways. The mud in Venice goes sideways. The stuff in the Grand Canyon does not represent millions of years of evolution or vast quantities of flood water settling out one on top of the other, because we're looking at not a vertical time, but a horizontal process. Now, keep that in mind, because we've done an awful lot more experiments with our strata machine, and this is just to get you up to date and to lead you to some of the other things I came across on the edge of the desert. Okay, there's our 2019 Mark 10 strata machine. Improved new driving forces. One of the results, now there's a still, hopefully this video will work shortly. Can you see the dip on the middle left side there? Can you see the plume of what really is sediment bursting up? Because we decided to check what would happen if we not only had water flowing sideways, but the biblical picture talks about fountains of the deep coming up from below. Well, you can see our layers of sediment that are formed. Let's click on here and watch. Now there's two things. The water's coming sideways, and it's coming up from the bottom of that, well, I guess you could call it anticline, syncline, whatever one of those two you want to pick on first. The curved bit. Okay, keep watching. Now we have a fountain coming up. The water is coming up from below. You watch what happens now. It is unbelievably fascinating, because there is no movement up and down except the water. The water's moving sideways, and you can see the little fountain at the top coming from what's underneath. Well, there's that nice black heavy layer again. Now keep watching, because the average person thinks all of this takes time. It takes movement of the rocks up and down. Same area. See the water coming up? But the water coming up is actually doing something that's totally unexpected. It's making the sediment go down. It's forming, well, that potentially looks like a rift valley. You know, the ones where everything cracks and falls down. But it's not cracking because of earth moving up and down. It's cracking because there's water there, and the water's actually, well, the water's coming up, but everything else is going down. Now, as a result, you end up with some spectacular formations that actually copy what's out there in the real world. Let's take you. There's the big picture. Layers coming from right to left, but layers forming reverse in the middle. I mean, look at that. Can you see that nice fractured straight line? Yes, that fractured straight line was caused by water, not by the earth cracking. Amazing, incredible. Take you one step further. When you look at this, lightened up a little bit. Now you can see straight lines there. You can see synclines. You can see anticlines. You can see fault grabens, etc. Fantastic. In other words, you don't need millions of years of earth movements. You don't even need the whole earth to move up and down to produce this. All of these nice straight lines in sediment are done when the sediment is liquid. Man, that's not what we expected, but it's absolutely amazing. So what we're looking at here is not time, but process. Now, you don't need to take our word for it. You actually can go and do the experiments yourself. When you look at the arguments over millions of years, or even some of the creationist arguments about the rocks at the bottom getting there first, then sediments cracking, etc. They've picked the wrong process. It's not the evidence that the world has which contradicts the word of God. It's the actual heart of man which deliberately wants to reject it. And you creationists, warning, warning, we'll be nice about it, but we're going to push you and push you and push you until you back off Steno as Saint Steno, the savior of geology. I'm sorry, he was a creationist. I'm sure he was a Christian. He certainly was into the priesthood, but he got it wrong, and we need to admit it. Oh, and yes, out there, added to our collection, look at these lovely gem-filled rocks that were coming down the creek. Look at this lovely, rather rare mineral of lead and beautiful stuff. Not a very common lead mineral, that one, but heavy as. Oh, back to Jurassic Ark, where all this goes on display in the end. Came home to find Daryl saving echidnas from road construction and all sorts of things. You know, our spiny anteaters, our marsupials. And the good news is, not only have we started to get road base, our shed has actually been finished. Fantastic. Just in time for our official opening at the end of September, September 24th. They'll not only see John Mackay enjoying the shade, they'll see the young men there doing their hard work, digging up fossils that may start at the top, but the logs go down, down, down. And just last week, we had two high schools there, two high school classes. Fantastic. And in fact, we opened up a new dig area for them so that they can go and learn how to dig. And the fossils that are coming out of Jurassic Ark or on display at Jurassic Ark are fantastic. You see, we've got a group interested in coming there that are studying dendrochronology. And the dendrochronology, you know, all those rings, they're trying to associate that with time. But in reality, as everybody who's studied the Jurassic has reached the conclusion, these trees come from a time that was actually much more even in climate. No harsh extremes of cold, no harsh extremes of hot, no drought, no floods, nice even climate with a wet, moisture-based environment all the time. Well, can I encourage you, for those of you in Queensland, or even if you got the money to fly up from Tasmania, September 24th, our first official opening. We tried last year, but the government clamped down on us and allowed us only 30 people. We nearly went bankrupt. This year, God willing, it will be open again. Oh, but look, I'll tell you what, on our trip out into the desert, there's me on the right, there's Daniel on the left, and there's Pastor Jack. You see, I preached at his Aboriginal church. So if you want to know about the origin of races, then you need to go and ask people where they think they came from. Yes, the Aborigines are really great at tracking. What do you think they are? Oh, well, there's kangaroos. There's all sorts of marsupials out there. In fact, because it had rained just a day before, you see the detail on the tracks that's been preserved, and even the raindrops that are pickled into the sand because the rain didn't last long, but long enough to actually make the sand wet enough to mimic these tracks beautifully.